This is a cinematic fiction story created purely for entertainment. All characters, locations, organizations, and events are entirely fictional. He didn't hit her. He never had. But the way Victor Hale looked at Elena Marlowe that night, standing in the doorway of their bedroom, rain cracking against the windows, like something trying to break in, was worse than any blow. His eyes moved over her slowly, the way a man takes inventory of a room he's about to burn down. Elena had her coat half on, one hand pressed flat against her swollen belly, and she was trying to hold his gaze without flinching. Trying. Because she knew what that look meant. She'd watched him use it on men who later disappeared. "You think I don't know," he said. His voice was quiet. That was the worst part. When Victor got loud, it meant he was still fighting. When he got quiet, it meant he'd already decided. Elena didn't answer him. "Walk out that door," Victor said, "and don't come back." She walked out. If you've ever watched someone you love leave and felt something lock inside your chest that you knew wasn't ever coming back open, drop your city in the comments. Let me know where in the world you're watching from tonight, because this story is going to travel far, and I want to see exactly how far. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now and hit that bell, because what Victor finds in the next 2 hours is going to change everything you think you know about loyalty, secrets, and the price of loving someone who was trying to save you while you were busy destroying them. The argument had started over nothing. That was the truth of it, and Victor Hale knew it even while it was still happening, which made it worse, not better. It had started with a phone call Elena didn't answer fast enough. She'd been in the kitchen, her back to him, standing at the counter with a glass of water she hadn't drunk yet, and her cell had buzzed on the island between them. She'd reached for it too quickly, turned the screen face down before he could read the name, and that small, fast motion, barely a second, barely anything had detonated something in Victor's chest that he hadn't felt in years. He hadn't said anything at first. He'd watched her take the call in the hallway, listened to the murmur of her voice through the wall, and by the time she came back into the kitchen, her expression had been arranged into something careful and neutral, the way a person arranges furniture to hide a water stain in the floor. He knew that look. He'd seen it on every man who'd ever tried to manage him. "Who was that?" he said. "Not a question." "My doctor," she said. Appointment reminder. Victor had looked at her for a long time. She'd looked back at him, steady, and that steadiness was what broke it open, because Elena had not always been steady with him. In the early years she'd been soft and quick to laugh, quick to cry, quick to reach for him in the dark without any reason except that she wanted to. That steadiness was new, and new things in his house, in his marriage, in the face of the woman carrying his child, new things were not welcome. "You want to try that again," he said. "Victor, say my name like that one more time," he said, "and I'll pull that phone out of your hand, read every message on it myself." Put the phone in her pocket. "You could do that," she said. "Could do a lot of things. Doesn't mean you should." That was when it went sideways, because she was right, and he knew she was right, and being right in front of Victor Hale, when Victor Hale was already building a fire inside his own ribs, did not protect you from the heat of it. It made it worse. He'd crossed the kitchen in 4 steps. He hadn't touched her. He wanted to be clear about that, even in his own mind. He'd never once raised a hand to Elena Marlowe, but he'd put himself close enough that she had to tilt her chin up to hold his eyes. And he'd let her see everything he wasn't saying. "I built this house," he said. "Everything in it. Every wall, every room, every inch of comfort you sleep in. I built it." "I know you did," she said quietly. "Then act like it." She'd gone very still, and then in a voice so controlled it barely moved the air between them, she said, "I am not one of your rooms, Victor." Step back. Not because he wanted to, because something in those words landed somewhere behind his sternum and stayed there, and he hadn't known what to do with it. The argument had continued for another 40 minutes after that. He didn't remember all of it clearly later. That was the nature of those kinds of fights. They burned too hot for clean memory. They left only edges and ash. He remembered raising his voice. He remembered her not raising hers, which was somehow more devastating. He remembered saying things he didn't entirely mean, and meaning things he didn't entirely say. He remembered the moment she went to the bedroom closet and came out with her coat. "Elena, I need air," she said. "It's raining, I know." "You're 8 months pregnant, Victor." She stopped at the bedroom door and looked back at him. And her face in that moment was something he would spend the next 6 hours trying to stop seeing. Not angry, not hurt, exactly, just tired. Tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. "I love you," she said. "I do, but I cannot be in this room with you right now." And then she was gone. He heard the front door. He heard the rain swallow the sound of her footsteps on the wet stone walk. He stood in the bedroom doorway for a long time, one hand on the frame, listening to nothing. He did not go after her. That was the first mistake. He would make others. He spent the first hour telling himself she'd be back in 20 minutes. Elena was sensible. She didn't do dramatic things. She'd walk half a block, get cold, and come back to deal with him the way she always did, directly, without theater, with that particular patience that had always made him feel, obscurely, like he was the one who needed managing. Poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon and stood at the window, watching the rain bend the trees along the front walk. 40 minutes, then an hour. He called her cell. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. Called again. Same. He texted, "Where are you?" Nothing. He poured more bourbon and didn't drink it. By the second hour, something had moved through his chest that was not quite fear and not quite anger, and sat somewhere between them like a stone. He'd called Declan. His driver told him to cruise the neighborhood. He'd called the main gate and confirmed Elena had walked out on foot, alone, no car. He'd stood in the kitchen with his phone in his hand and looked at the counter where the glass of water she'd never drunk was still sitting. And he'd had to set his own glass down very carefully, because his hand was doing something it had not done in years. It was shaking slightly. Not from alcohol. He hadn't drunk enough for that. From something else, something older. He went upstairs. He didn't know why, exactly. He told himself he was checking her things, making sure she'd taken her phone charger and her prenatal vitamins, building a case for exactly how spontaneous her departure had been. He was lying to himself. He went upstairs because the room still smelled like her, the specific cedar and something warm, that he'd never been able to name, and he needed to be in the room she'd been in. He sat on the edge of the bed. He noticed the floorboard, because he'd never noticed it before, and Victor Hale noticed everything. He had trained himself to notice everything over 20 years of operating in rooms where small things killed you. The board was slightly raised at one corner, near the base of the wardrobe on her side of the bed. A centimeter, maybe less. The wardrobe stood at an angle that would have hidden it perfectly from any vantage point except the one he happened to be sitting in. And it had been sitting at that angle for as long as they'd lived in this house, which meant he had never, in 4 years of sleeping in this room, been in exactly this position, at exactly this angle, with nothing else to look at. He crouched down. He pressed the corner of the board. It rocked slightly, loose at one end, firm at the other. He worked his fingers under it and lifted. The box was matte black, roughly the size of a shoebox, but lower, heavier. It had a combination lock, 3 digits, built into the front latch. It was dusty. It had been there a while. Victor sat on the floor of his own bedroom, holding a locked box that belonged to his wife, and felt something happen inside his face that he was glad no one was there to see. He tried her birthday, wrong. He tried his birthday, wrong. He tried their anniversary, wrong. He tried the month and year they'd met. He sat with the box in his lap for a long time, turning it over, running his thumb along the seams. It was well made, not cheap. This was not an impulse purchase. Someone had picked this box carefully. He went to the garage and came back with a flathead screwdriver and a pair of bolt cutters. It took him 11 minutes to force it open without destroying the contents. He was patient. Patience was a thing he'd taught himself the way other men learned languages badly at first, then well enough to survive, then well enough to use as a weapon. The lid came open. He looked at what was inside for a full 30 seconds without touching anything. On top, a photograph, old printed on the kind of paper that fades at the edges, slightly creased at one corner. 2 figures. Elena younger, maybe mid-20s, her hair longer and darker, sitting on a bench somewhere he didn't recognize. Next to her, close enough that their shoulders touched, a teenage boy. Maybe 15, 16, dark eyes. The boy was not looking at the camera. He was looking at Elena with an expression Victor could not immediately name. Beneath the photograph, sealed letters. 6 of them, in plain white envelopes, each one numbered in Elena's handwriting. No names on the outside. Just 1 through 6, and beneath the letters, tucked flat against the bottom of the box, a hospital bracelet. The kind they put on newborns. Plastic white, printed in small hospital font. The name on the bracelet was Halle. His name. His family name. On a newborn bracelet, Victor sat with the bracelet in his hand and felt the floor tilt under him, except the floor hadn't moved, and everything else had. He opened letter 1. Elena's handwriting was careful and precise, the handwriting of someone who had thought very hard about each word before committing it to paper. The letter was dated 14 months ago, almost exactly. She had been with him for 4 years. 14 months ago, she had still been as far as he had known completely and entirely on his side. Victor, the letter began. Not my love, not darling, not any of the things she called him in real life. Just his name, flat and direct. If you're reading this, one of 2 things has happened. Either I am no longer able to tell you myself, or you found this before I was ready for you to find it. Either way, I need you to understand something before you read the rest. Everything I did because I could not lose you. Not to Silas, not to the lie you've been living inside of for the past 8 years. I am not your enemy, I never was. Victor read those 4 lines 3 times. Then he read the rest of the letter. He was on the floor of the bedroom, with his back against the wardrobe, and all 6 letters open around him, when he understood that the world he had been operating inside of for the past 8 years was a room someone else had built. The first letter laid it out plainly in Elena's precise and merciless handwriting. 8 years ago, Victor had survived an ambush in the parking structure below the Meridian Hotel downtown. 3 men. 2 had died in the exchange. Victor had taken a bullet through his left shoulder, and another one that had missed his spine by less than an inch. The official story, the story the family accepted, the story Victor himself had accepted, was that the hit had been ordered by the Caloran Syndicate on the West Side, retaliation for a territory dispute that had been escalating for months. Elena's letter said that was a lie, not a misunderstanding. Not a rumor, a deliberate constructed lie. The second letter was evidence. Photocopies of financial transfers Victor didn't recognize, routed through a shell company he'd never heard of, paying out to 3 names he'd never seen, not his people, not Caloran people, contractors from somewhere else entirely. Hired anonymously. The payments had come from an account that traced, through 4 layers of corporate paperwork that Elena had somehow obtained, back to a man Victor had trusted completely for 8 years. Silas Vane, Victor's advisor. The man who had driven Victor to the hospital after the ambush. Who had sat in the waiting room for 6 hours while Victor was in surgery. Who had held Victor's hand, an actual physical gesture that neither of them had ever acknowledged afterward when Victor had woken up and been told how close it had been. Who had, according to Elena's careful and devastating documentation, arranged for that closeness in the first place. Victor read the second letter twice. He read the financial records. He was not a man who impressed easily. He had seen forgeries and fabrications manufactured by professionals, and he looked at these documents the way he looked at everything, with the cold and analytical part of his mind that he kept separate from everything emotional. And the cold and analytical part of his mind, after 2 careful readings, said, "This is real." The third letter explained how she'd found it. A woman named Rosario, who had worked accounting for the family briefly 6 years ago, and had been quietly let go, had contacted Elena through a mutual acquaintance 8 months into their marriage. Rosario had found something during her time with the organization, something she hadn't known what to do with, something she'd kept because destroying it felt dangerous and reporting it felt fatal. She'd held it for 2 years before she found Elena. Victor understood now what that phone call tonight had been. The one Elena had taken in the hallway, the one that had started the fight. He sat with that understanding for a long time. She had known. For over a year. She had sat across from Silas Vane at dinner tables, in meeting rooms at the hospital when she'd had her first prenatal appointment, and Silas had brought flowers. She had smiled at the man and passed him the bread basket and talked to him about the weather and carried all of this like a stone in her chest, every single day. Because she'd believed, according to the 4th letter, that going to Victor directly would get her killed. Not by Victor, she was explicit about that, painfully so. She didn't believe Victor would hurt her. She believed Silas would. Because Silas, according to the evidence Elena had accumulated, was not simply a man who had tried to kill Victor once. He was a man who had spent 8 years positioning himself carefully, acquiring leverage. building a shadow operation inside Victor's organization that Victor had never seen because Victor had trusted him completely, and completely trusted men do not see things clearly. "You let him in," Victor said out loud, to no one, to the empty room. He was talking to himself. He never did that. He pressed the heel of his hand against his right eye. "You let him all the way in." His cell buzzed. Declan, no sign of her on the east side. "Going to check the park." Victor stared at the message. He put his phone face down on the floor beside him. Picked up the photograph again. The boy in the photograph. 15, maybe 16, dark eyes, not looking at the camera. Looking at Elena like she was the only solid thing in the room. The hospital bracelet that read ALE. He turned the bracelet over. On the back, in the same small hospital font, a date. 23 years ago. And beneath the date, in handwriting that was not Elena's older, shakier, someone elderly or frightened or both 3 words. He didn't know. Victor felt the air go out of him. He sat very still. He was 41 years old. He had been in the Hale organization his entire adult life, and for most of his childhood before that. He had always understood his family as something he'd inherited, a weight and a legacy and a machinery he'd been born into and had chosen, consciously, at 18, to run rather than escape. He had never questioned the shape of that history. It had never occurred to him that the shape might be wrong. Picked up the 5th letter. His hands were not shaking anymore. They'd gone past, shaking into something steadier and colder, the specific steadiness of a man who has moved through fear and come out the other side into something that functions like calm, but is not calm at all. It is the feeling of a decision being made below the level of conscious thought. It is the feeling of a direction being chosen by the body before the mind catches up. The 5th letter was the shortest, only half a page. "I have kept the witness safe," Elena had written. "I know you don't know about her. I know you're going to be angry that I didn't come to you. Victor, I need you to understand that I tried. I tried 3 times to find a way to tell you. And every time I got close, something happened that reminded me what Silas does to people who get close to telling you. The man who introduced me to Rosario had a car accident 6 weeks after our first meeting. He survived. He didn't remember the meeting. I am not an irrational woman. I know what that means. I wanted to wait until after the baby. I wanted us to have one thing that was just ours before I broke everything open. I'm sorry I couldn't hold it together long enough." Victor put the letter down. He looked at the photograph one more time. The boy, the bracelet, the handwriting on the back that wasn't Elena's. He understood what he was looking at. He didn't want to understand it. He understood it anyway. He got up off the floor. He put the letters back in the box in their numbered order. He put the photograph on top and the bracelet on top of the photograph. He closed the lid. He could not relatch it. He'd broken the lock, so he held it closed with both hands for a moment, which was a useless gesture, but he did it anyway. Then he set the box on Elena's side of the bed. He went to the window. The rain had eased slightly, the hard driving rain gone to something softer and more persistent. The street below was empty, except for standing water in the gutters and the wavering orange reflection of a street lamp. He had 4 names in his head: Elena, Silas, Rosario. And the boy in the photograph whose name he didn't know yet, but whose eyes had looked at Elena the way you look at the only solid thing in a room. He had decisions to make, and he had no one to make them with. That was the exact shape of what 8 years of the wrong kind of trust had left him. A man alone in a room he thought he owned, holding evidence that the room had always belonged to someone else. Picked up his phone and called Declan. "Where are you?" he said. "North side." "She's not in the park." "Boss, I stopped looking," Victor said. Pause. "Sir," I said. "Stop looking." He pressed his thumb against the condensation on the window glass. Drew a slow, meaningless line through it. "Go home." "Victor, she's 8 months pregnant." It's Declan. His voice dropped. Just a degree. The way temperature drops before a storm. "Go home." The call ended. Victor put his coat on. He went to the desk drawer in the study and took out the secondary phone, the one that wasn't registered to him, the one he used for conversations he didn't want recorded. He sat with it in his hand and thought about the name Rosario and the shell company in the financial records and the car accident 6 weeks after the introduction. He thought about the photograph. He thought about a boy with dark eyes who looked at Elena Marlowe like she was the only solid thing in the room. And he thought about Silas Vane, who had held his hand in a hospital waiting room 8 years ago and told him how glad he was that Victor had survived, and who had been saying that same thing with his face, reliably and convincingly, every single day since. Victor had built his entire life on the principle that loyalty was the only currency worth holding. He had tested men for it, rewarded it, punished its absence with a completeness that had made him feared in 3 and respected in 12 more. He had believed genuinely and without question that Silas Vane was the most loyal man he had ever known. Picked up the secondary phone. He had one number in it. A name he hadn't dialed in 4 years. A man who owed him a debt that had never been called in. A man who operated in the kind of darkness that even Victor's world didn't touch directly. A man who could find a woman named Rosario and a witness and a boy in an old photograph without leaving footprints. His thumb hovered. Outside the window, somewhere in the city, his wife was walking in the rain with his child under her heart and 6 letters worth of secrets behind her eyes, and she had not come back, and he had told her not to. Pressed call. The line rang twice. Victor said, "I need something found." He stood at the window while he talked, watching the rain, and for the first time in 8 years he felt the specific and clarifying sensation of not knowing who he was dealing with. It was a feeling he had almost forgotten. He had not missed it. It meant he was starting over. It meant everything he'd built was standing on a foundation that someone else had laid. It meant the most dangerous man in Victor Hale's world was not some rival on the west side, was not some federal prosecutor building a case in a downtown office, was not some shadow in an alley or a name on a rival family's ledger. The most dangerous man in Victor Hale's world had a key to his front door, a standing invitation to his dinner table, and 8 years of access to everything Victor loved. And that man did not yet know that Victor had found the box. That, Victor thought, pressing his thumb against the cold glass of the window, was the only advantage he had left. He intended to use it. This is a cinematic fiction story created purely for entertainment. All characters, locations, organizations, and events are entirely fictional. The man Victor called at 2 a.m. was named Croft, and he didn't have a first name that anyone used. He had a voice like gravel in a tin can and a reputation that Victor had spent 4 years trying not to need. And when Victor laid out what he wanted, not all of it, never all of it, just the edges. Just enough. Croft was quiet for a long time on the other end of the line. A woman named Rosario, Victor said. Used to work family accounting, left about 6 years back. I need a current location. That it? No. Victor looked at the photograph in his other hand. There's a boy in an old photograph. I'll send it to you. I need a name. Another silence. You want me to ID someone from a photograph. I want you to find out who he is, where he is, and who he belongs to. Croft said, that last part's a strange way to put it. Find him, Victor said and ended the call. He didn't sleep. He sat in the study with the secondary phone on the desk in front of him, and the box from beneath the floorboard open at his elbow. And he read through all 6 letters 3 more times, the same cold and methodical attention he gave to financial audits and threat assessments, part of his brain that stripped sentiment out of information and looked only at what was verifiable, what was probable, and what was missing. What was missing was what troubled him most. Elena had documented the financial transfers. She had documented Rosario's initial contact, the shell company, the contractors. She had documented, in the 5th letter, that a witness existed, someone who could place Silas at the center of the ambush order, someone whose testimony could corroborate the paper trail. But she had not named the witness. Not once in 6 letters had she written that name down. Victor understood why. If the box was ever found by the wrong person, if Silas or someone working for Silas discovered it, the one thing Elena had protected was the witness's identity. She'd kept it out of the paper. She'd kept it in her head or somewhere else entirely, somewhere Victor hadn't looked yet. He had torn apart her side of the closet by 4 a.m. Carefully, he didn't want her to know he'd been through it. Not yet. Not until he understood more of the shape of this. He found nothing. He checked the drawer in her nightstand. The false bottom he'd installed himself when they moved in still there, still containing the things he'd put in it, nothing of hers. He checked behind the painting in the hallway, the loose panel in the guest bathroom, the small cavity above the kitchen cabinets where he kept a secondary firearm. Nothing. Which meant the witness's location and identity were somewhere he hadn't thought to look. or somewhere he had no access to, or they were with Elena. He was back in the study with cold coffee, when his phone, the main one, rang at 6:42 in the morning. The screen read Silas. Victor looked at the name for 4 rings. Picked up. Early, Victor said. Couldn't sleep, Silas said. His voice was easy, unhurried, the voice of a man who'd had a full night's rest and was calling because he was genuinely thinking of his friend. Victor had heard that voice 1,000 times. He was listening to it now differently, the way you listen to a song after someone has told you what the lyrics actually mean, and the meaning is not what you thought. Heard from Declan you had a rough night. Elena okay? There it was. Declan. Victor filed that away. He had told Declan to go home. Declan had called Silas before doing so, or Silas had called Declan, or there was a line between them that Victor had never looked at directly, because he had never had reason to look. She went for a walk, Victor said. She's fine. In the rain? At that hour? She's 8 months pregnant, Silas. She runs hot. Small, warm laugh. Of course. Everything all right between you two? We're fine, Victor said. He was looking at the photograph on the desk in front of him. The boy's dark eyes. The way he leaned slightly toward Elena without appearing to lean. We had a disagreement. It's handled. Good. A pause that was calibrated to feel like genuine relief. You need anything today? I can move the Ferretti meeting if you want the morning. Keep it, Victor said. I'll be there. 10 o'clock. I'll have the numbers ready, Silas. Victor let a beat pass. Let it sit there. Just a half second too long. The kind of pause that in a different conversation might mean nothing. And in this one meant everything. You ever hear back from the Meridian insurance matter? The one from 8 years back. Silence. 3 seconds of it, which was 2 seconds longer than the question warranted from a man who was innocent of anything related to it. That was all wrapped up years ago, Silas said carefully. Something came up in the files, Victor said. Old paperwork. Nothing urgent, right. Another beat. Can pull whatever you need. I know you can, Victor said. See you at 10. He set the phone down and looked at his hand. Steady. That was good. He needed steady. He had 2 hours before the meeting. He used the first hour to make 3 phone calls he'd never made before to men on the periphery of his organization. Men who handled specific and narrow functions. Men who existed in the structure without being central enough to have been folded into whatever Silas had been building inside of it. He was careful about what he asked and how he asked it. He did not name Silas. He asked instead about a shell company, a specific routing number from one of Elena's letters, framing it as a compliance review flagged by an outside auditor. 2 of the 3 men had never heard of it. The third, a man named Paulson, who handled secondary liquidity across 4 accounts, went quiet in a way that told Victor he had heard of it, and then said carefully that he'd need to pull records and call Victor back. When? Victor said. End of day? Paulson's voice had the particular tightness of a man who has just understood that he is standing on ground he didn't know was unstable. End of day, Victor said, and felt the shape of the thing grow a little clearer. He used the second hour to think about Elena. She had been gone 9 hours. She was 8 months pregnant. She was out in a city he controlled, which should have meant something, but right now meant very little. Because every channel he used to find people was a channel that Silas had access to, which meant every man he sent looking for her was potentially a man who might report back to the wrong person. He had sent Declan home, specifically because of this, and now he was questioning whether that had been the right call. She was smart. She had been smart enough to build an entire parallel investigation for 14 months without him seeing a single edge of it. She was not a woman who walked into storms without knowing where she was going. He chose to believe she had somewhere to go. He chose it not because it comforted him, but because it was the most logical reading of who she was, and because the alternative that she was out there in the rain, alone, without a plan made the stone in his chest heavier than he could afford right now. He put his coat on and drove himself to the Ferretti meeting. He had not driven himself anywhere in 3 years. He had a driver for reasons both practical and symbolic. Walking into the parking structure below his offices without Declan in the front seat was a specific and intentional choice, because the last time he'd been in a parking structure alone was the night of the Meridian ambush, and he wanted to feel that again. He wanted it present in his body while he sat across from Silas Vane. He parked on the 3rd level. He sat in the car for a moment. Fluorescent lights hummed. A water stain on the pillar in front of him was shaped vaguely like a hand. He looked at it until it was just a water stain again, then got out of the car. Silas was already in the conference room when Victor arrived. It was unusual. Silas was punctual, not early, and he had the senior advisor's particular habit of arriving 30 seconds before anything was scheduled to begin, not a minute before, which Victor had always read as a demonstration of control over one's own time. Being early said something different. Being early said nervous. The Ferretti representatives were not there yet. It was 9:52. Victor and Silas were alone in the room, with a spread of coffee and pastries that no one was going to touch, and a stack of folders that Silas had arranged with the precision of a man who needed something to do with his hands. "You look like you didn't sleep," Silas said. "I didn't," Victor said. He poured coffee. He did not look at Silas while he did it. "How's Margaret?" Silas blinked. Victor never asked about Margaret. Silas's wife was a pleasant, quiet woman who appeared at charity functions and did not ask questions about her husband's work, and Victor had never once initiated a conversation about her in 8 years of daily contact. "She's fine," Silas said. "She's well. Why? Just asking." Victor sat down. He set his coffee cup precisely in front of him, centered, equidistant from both edges of the folder before him. "You two still in the house on Lakewood?" "Victor." Silas's voice shifted barely perceptibly, the way a floor shifts before it gives. "What's this about?" "The Ferretti meeting," Victor said pleasantly. "What else?" The Ferretti representatives arrived at 10 exactly. The meeting lasted an hour and 40 minutes and covered distribution logistics, a pricing disagreement, and a territorial boundary question that had been simmering for 6 weeks. Victor participated with complete attention. He asked precise questions. He made 2 decisions that both sides accepted, and he watched Silas the entire time, from the periphery of his attention, the way you watch a fire you've started deliberately, not anxiously, just carefully, making sure it spreads in the direction you've chosen. Silas was good. Victor had always known Silas was good. He was smooth and specific, and his answers never ran long enough to create problems. But Victor was watching differently now, and what he saw, watching differently, was how often Silas positioned himself with sight lines, how often he sat facing doors, how his right hand had a slight, intermittent motion near his jacket pocket, not reaching, just hovering, the hand of a man whose body was managing something his face had decided not to show. After the Ferretti people left, Victor stood at the window. Below 12 floors down, the city was doing its mid-morning business in pale October sunlight that the rain of the night before had left smelling like wet stone and metal. "Paulson called me," Silas said from behind him. Victor had expected this. He'd expected it in the back of his mind the moment Paulson had hesitated on the phone, and he'd left it there, in the back of his mind, and let the morning play out. He did not turn around. "What did he want?" Victor said. "He said you were asking about a routing number, from an old account." Silas's voice was very controlled, very even. He was confused about the context. "I told him it was a compliance review." He said that. A pause. "Victor, if there's a question about something in the accounts, you can come to me directly." "You know that. I know that," Victor said. "Then why?" "Because I wanted the answer before I had the conversation," Victor said. Turned around. He looked at Silas directly for the first time since the Meridian meeting 8 years ago that he'd been unconscious for, and he looked at him the way he'd taught himself to look at things that required clear assessment, without anger, without the static of personal feeling, just the clean and careful taking of inventory. What he saw was a man who had aged well and kept himself controlled and was standing very still in the middle of Victor's conference room, with an expression that was doing 3 things at once, which was 2 things too many. "Tell me about the shell company, Silas." Silence. Not the silence of confusion. Not the silence of someone reaching back through memory to locate an answer. The silence of calculation. Victor had interrogated enough men to know the difference. "I don't know what you're referring to," Silas said. "Yes, you do, Victor." "The shell company," Victor said again without raising his voice. "The one the routing number traces to. The one that paid 3 contractors in September, 8 years ago. The month of the Meridian ambush." He watched Silas's face. Watched the small, almost invisible event that happened in it, not guilt, not fear exactly, more like the specific micro-expression of a man who has just felt the ground close over something he buried. You want to tell me it's nothing? Go ahead. I'm listening. Silas said nothing. That's what I thought, Victor said. You don't understand the full picture, Silas said quietly. Then explain it to me. It's not. Silas stopped, pressed his lips together, looked away for 1 second, which was the first time in 8 years of Victor, knowing him that he had looked away from Victor in a difficult conversation. And in that 1 second of averted eyes, Victor saw exactly how frightened the man was and how hard he was working not to show it. More complicated than a routing number, Victor. There were things happening in the organization. That year, threats you weren't aware of, threats that required decisions that couldn't go through you. Decisions like trying to kill me, Victor said. The air in the room changed. Silas's face went through something that was not quite blankness. It was something more deliberate than blankness, more constructed, and then he said, "That's not what happened." Convince me, Victor. You need to hear me clearly. Silas took 1 step forward. Just one, measured the way a man steps across uncertain ice. Whatever you think you've found, wherever this is coming from, there are things in motion that you cannot disrupt right now. There are arrangements in place that protect you, that have been protecting you. From what? Victor said. From the people who would have moved against you years ago if I hadn't. Silas stopped himself again. Recalibrated. His hand moved toward his jacket pocket and stopped. I've kept this organization stable. I've kept you alive. The decisions I made were not made against you. You paid 3 contractors to put 2 bullets in me. One of those bullets was never supposed to hit you, Silas said, and then he heard himself say it, and his face changed completely. The room was very quiet. Victor looked at him. Say that again, Victor said. Silas's jaw tightened. He had the look of a man who has just handed over the one thing he could not afford to hand over, and is now standing very still, hoping somehow to take it back, knowing he cannot. It was a message, Silas said finally, to the Calorans. To make it look like they'd moved against you. To consolidate. To consolidate, Victor repeated. His voice had gone completely flat. Not quiet the way it got in the argument with Elena, where quiet meant contained anger. Quiet the way a room goes quiet when everything in it has stopped moving. To consolidate what? Control of the expansion. The Western accounts. There were board members who were... Silas exhaled through his nose. Victor, listen to me. What was done for the long-term protection of everything you'd built. You survived. The organization came out stronger. The Calorans were pushed back 2 years. I almost died, Victor said. Yes, you sat in that waiting room for 6 hours. Yes, you held my hand. Silas didn't answer that. You held my hand, Victor said again, and there was something in his voice now that was worse than anger, something rougher and older and harder to name. And you knew. The whole time you were sitting there, you knew. I needed you to survive, Silas said, and the terrible thing was that it sounded, in the specific timbre of his voice, completely true. I needed you to survive because without you the whole thing falls. I never wanted you dead, Victor. That was never the objective. What was the objective? Silas was quiet for a moment. Then position. I needed a position in the organization that the board wouldn't challenge. If you'd walked into that parking structure and walked out without a scratch, and the Calorans took the blame, I would have stayed in exactly the same place. Crisis changed things. Your survival changed things. I was the man who held it together while you were in surgery. I was the man who coordinated the response, managed the board, kept the Calorans from using the chaos to move on the south side. He paused. After that, no one questioned my place at your side. Not once. Victor stood at the window in the pale October light and listened to this and felt something he hadn't expected. Not rage, not the volcanic and physical fury that he'd built his reputation on. Fury that had made men leave rooms quickly and carefully for 20 years. What he felt was something quieter and more durable. He felt it settle into him the way water settles into stone, finding every crack, making itself permanent. Where is Elena? Victor said. The shift in subject was deliberate. He watched Silas process it, watched him recalibrate again, watched the calculation behind the controlled face. I don't know where Elena is, Silas said carefully. You called Declan at 2 a.m, Victor said. Declan called you before he went home. You knew she'd left. You knew I was alone in that house. He let a pause sit there. What did you do with that information, Silas? Nothing. I was concerned you were gathering intelligence, Victor said. You do it every time there's instability. I used to think it was efficiency. Now I understand what it actually is. He picked up his phone from the conference table. He looked at the screen briefly, then put it in his jacket pocket. We're done for today, Victor. We have to talk about this. If you go out of here and start making calls, asking questions, there are people who are going to notice. Good, Victor said. He walked to the door. Victor. Silas's voice dropped. The control had slipped from it now, just slightly, and what was underneath was not the warmth Victor had heard for 8 years. It was something more compressed. You have a lot to protect. Elena, the child, what you've built. You need to think very carefully before you decide that burning everything down serves any of that. Victor stopped at the door. He didn't turn around. Are you threatening my wife, he said. I'm reminding you, Silas said, that some arrangements are not simple to exit. The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. Then Victor walked out. He took the stairs down 12 floors instead of the elevator because he needed the motion, needed the physical percussion of his own steps against concrete to stay in his body rather than the cold white space that his mind was trying to move into. On the 6th floor landing, he stopped and pressed his back against the wall and closed his eyes for 30 seconds. He breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the breath of a man managing himself the way you manage something volatile carefully, with full attention, no sudden movements. Silas had confirmed everything, except the thing Victor needed most, where Elena was. That question had just become more urgent than it had been this morning. Because Silas had been calm during most of that conversation, controlled, playing his angles with the practiced ease of a man who had been doing exactly this for 8 years inside Victor's own house. And then Victor had mentioned Elena and Silas had shifted. Just slightly, just 1 degree, but Victor had been watching. Silas knew something about Elena's current location. He might not have the exact address, but he knew something. And whether or not his threat just now was genuine, some arrangements are not simple to exit. The fact that he'd made it at all meant that the timeline had just compressed. Victor came out of the stairwell into the lobby. He walked through it without looking left or right, out through the glass doors, and stopped on the sidewalk in the cold October air. His secondary phone buzzed. Croft, he answered immediately. The woman, Croft said. Rosario, I have a location. Where, Victor said. Evanston. She's been there about 2 years, looks like. Low profile, different name on the utilities, but the face matches. The photograph, Victor said. The boy. Still working that one, Croft said. But I've got something adjacent. The photograph, the background, behind the subjects. There's a building partially visible. I pulled the architectural details, ran it against public records. The building is in Pilsen, South Side. It's a community center that closed in 2009. The records from that facility include a youth program that operated there from 2005 to 2009. And Victor said. The program coordinator, Croft said, was a woman named Elena Marlowe. Victor stood on the sidewalk with the phone at his ear and the October wind cold against his face, and he understood that he was not dealing with a complication in his marriage. He was dealing with something that had existed before his marriage, something Elena had brought into their life already fully formed, already weighted with history and consequence, and the particular gravity of things that cannot be undone. Find who was registered in that youth program, Victor said. Specifically anyone with the family name Hale. Croft was quiet for 2 seconds. I'm going to open something up, he said. It wasn't a warning exactly. It was the observation of a man who tracked information for a living and understood what certain searches meant. I know what it's going to open, Victor said. Do it anyway. Put the phone away. He looked at the street in front of him. Traffic, ordinary morning traffic, taxis and delivery trucks, and a woman walking a small dog and 2 men in suits arguing over something on a shared phone screen, the entire ordinary machinery of a city that did not know or care about what was happening inside his chest. Paulson called at noon, while Victor was sitting in his car in a parking lot, 3 blocks from the office, eating nothing, drinking water from a bottle he'd found in the back seat. Mr. Hale. Pons was the voice of a man who has made a decision about which side of something he is on and is not entirely at peace with it. I pulled the records you asked about. The shell company Meridian Ancillary Holdings, I've seen those routing numbers before. They come through a secondary ledger I manage for Mr. Vane. Victor said nothing. I should have. Paulson stopped. Swallowed audibly. I thought it was standard parallel accounting. Mr. Vane told me it was for external consultants off book, but not I didn't know what it was actually for. I need you to understand that. How much has moved through it, Victor said. Over 8 years. A pause. Roughly 4.3 million. Victor closed his eyes. The most recent activity, Paulson said, was 48 hours ago. A transfer out. 200,000. I don't have the destination. 48 hours ago. 2 days ago. Before last night's argument. Before Elena walked out. Before Victor found the box. Silas had moved money 2 days ago, and Victor did not know why. And the not knowing was the most dangerous part of all of this, because it meant something was already in motion that Victor had not started and could not yet see the shape of. Paulson, Victor said. Sir, you're going to send me everything you have on that ledger. Every transaction, every date, every routing number. You're going to do it to the secondary address I'm going to text you in the next 5 minutes. And then you're going to take your family somewhere for the next few days. Not a hotel. Somewhere without a reservation. A long silence. That bad? Paulson said. Yes, Victor said. That bad. He sent the text, started the car, and drove north toward Evanston. He hadn't told anyone he was going. He hadn't brought Declan, hadn't brought anyone. He was alone in his car on the highway, with the secondary phone charging in the cup holder and the main phone off, completely off, for the first time in 3 years. He drove for 37 minutes. He found Rosario's address from Croft's message, a side street of narrow houses with small yards, the kind of neighborhood that was respectable without being comfortable, the kind of place a woman chose when she needed to be invisible without being obvious about it. He parked half a block down and sat for a moment. The house had the lights on in the front room. There was a car in the driveway, a beige Honda Civic, recent model, nothing remarkable. There was a pot of something on the front steps, a dead plant, the kind of detail that said a person was busy rather than careless. Victor got out of the car. He was halfway up the front walk when the door opened. The woman who opened it was not Rosario. It was Elena. She stood in the doorway with her coat still on, her hair damp, her face, when she saw him cycling through a sequence of emotions so fast that he caught all of them. Shock, then a flash of something that looked almost like relief, then fear. Then the same careful steadiness he'd seen in their kitchen 14 hours ago, settling over everything else like a lid. Victor, she said. Elena, he said. They looked at each other across 8 feet of dead front yard in the pale afternoon light. How did you find— It doesn't matter how I found it, he said. Stopped at the bottom of the front steps. He looked up at her. I read the letters. Her face did something quiet and complicated. All of them, he said. She put one hand flat against the doorframe. The other hand moved instinctively to her belly. That gesture he'd watched 1,000 times in 8 months, not dramatic, not performative. Just the hand going where it went when she needed something solid. Silas knows you left, Victor said. He moved money 2 days ago. 200,000, destination unknown. Whatever he's planning, it's already started, Elena. Whatever arrangement you've been keeping wherever you've had that witness, we have maybe hours before he figures out that I know. She looked at him for a long moment. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were tired and red-rimmed, and she was the most exhausted-looking person he had ever seen, and she was still the most composed person in his immediate vicinity, which was both admirable and something he didn't have a word for. Come inside, she said finally. He came inside. The house smelled like coffee and old wood, and something else faintly that he couldn't name. A woman he didn't recognize was sitting at the kitchen table with a laptop open in front of her middle-aged, dark-haired, watchful eyes that tracked Victor the instant he crossed the threshold with the specific attention of someone who had been expecting a threat and was still deciding whether he was one. This was Rosario. She looked at him the way you look at a fire you've been describing to someone for a long time and are now seeing in person. Elena sat down at the table. She didn't take her coat off. Victor stayed standing, near the door, because the room was small and he was large, and he was aware, acutely aware, that the women in this room had more information than he did, and that awareness sat poorly on him. Tell me about the witness, he said. Elena looked at Rosario. Rosario looked at Victor. The witness, Rosario said carefully, is not just a witness. Then what is she? Victor said. Rosario said. And he is currently about 23 years old, and he has been staying in a property on the southeast side for the past 6 weeks. She stopped, looked at Elena again. Elena looked at Victor. Her face had settled into something final, something decided, the face of a woman who has held a door shut for a very long time and has just let go of the handle. He's your son, Victor, she said. This is a cinematic fiction story created purely for entertainment. All characters, locations, organizations, and events are entirely fictional. The kitchen was very small and very quiet, and the word son sat in the middle of it, like something that had fallen from a great height and was still vibrating from the impact. Victor did not move. He was standing near the door with his coat on and his hands at his sides, and he was aware of the specific sensation of the floor being exactly where it had always been, solid and unchanged beneath him, while everything above it rearranged itself into a configuration he did not recognize. He looked at Elena. She looked back at him. She did not look away. Say that again, he said. You heard me, she said. Say it again anyway. Elena exhaled through her nose. Her hand was still flat against her belly, that constant quiet gesture. His name is Daniel. He's 23. He was born before you and I met, before any of this, before the organization, before Chicago, before everything you know about me. I was 19. I was alone. I couldn't. She stopped. Pressed her lips together. Started again. I made a decision I have never stopped paying for. I gave him up. I told myself it was the right thing. I told myself he'd have better. He'd have stable. He'd have everything I didn't. Her voice was flat and controlled, and underneath the control was something that had been compressed. For so long it had changed molecular structure. The family that took him had the last name Hale. It was a coincidence. Victor, I need you to understand that. I did not know your name when I named him. I did not know you existed. Victor said nothing. He found me 4 years ago, Elena said. Right around the time you and I started. He'd been looking for 2 years. He was 20. He'd aged out of the system, and he needed something. Not money, not the story, just a face. Just to see where he came from. She looked at her hands. I told him I'd find a way to be in his life. Carefully. I didn't tell him about you, not at first. And then I married you. And then I found out what Silas had done. And then I understood that Daniel... She paused again. Looked up. He was there, Victor. The night of the Meridian ambush. He was 17. He was running errands for one of the contractors. He didn't know what he was running. He saw things. He heard things. He kept it because he didn't know what it meant, kept it the way a kid keeps something dangerous, because letting go of it felt worse than holding it. Victor pulled a chair out from the table and sat down. He did it slowly, without drama, the way a man sits down, when he needs the chair more than he wants to admit. He put both hands flat on the table in front of him. He looked at them for a moment. He's the witness, Victor said. Yes, Elena said. My son is the witness, yes. Rosario had her hands folded on the table in front of her laptop, and she was being very still in the way of a person who has understood that the conversation happening across from them requires absolute stillness, that any noise or movement would be an intrusion with consequences. She was watching Victor the way you watch weather that hasn't made up its mind. Where is he now? Victor said. Southeast side, Elena said. A property, I can't tell you the address here. Not because I don't trust you. Because this room might not be... She glanced at Rosario. The room is clean, Rosario said quietly. I swept it this morning. Tell me the address, Victor said. Victor Elena. He looked at her. He was not angry. That was the thing that surprised him most about himself. In this moment he was not angry, or if anger was somewhere in him, it had been pushed so far below the surface by everything else pressing down on it that it was not accessible. What he felt was something rawer and less familiar. Something that had no tactical use and no operational function. I have been sitting in my own life for 8 years, not knowing the shape of it. I need to know where my son is. She held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she said the address. He memorized it the way he memorized everything important once, completely, without writing it down. There's something else, Rosario said. Both of them looked at her. Rosario opened the laptop and turned it to face Victor. On the screen was a surveillance photograph, grainy but legible, time-stamped 11:14 the previous night, while Victor had been sitting on his bedroom floor, reading Elena's letters. The photograph showed the exterior of a building on the southeast side. A car was parked outside. 2 men were visible, one near the entrance, one leaning against the car. The man leaning against the car was someone Victor recognized. His name was Greer, and he worked for Silas. "This was sent to me an hour ago," Rosario said, "by a contact who monitors activity in that neighborhood. That building," she pointed to the screen, "that is 3 blocks from Daniel's current address." The stone in Victor's chest dropped somewhere lower. "Silas already knows," he said. "I don't know if he knows exactly," Rosario said, "but he's close. Greer doesn't go anywhere without a reason." Victor stood up. He was moving before he'd consciously decided to move, jacket already buttoned, hand on his phone, the cold operational machinery of his mind, clicking into a configuration he hadn't used since before Elena, since before any of the things that had softened the edges of how he operated. "I need to get to him first," he said. "Victor," Elena was on her feet. "You cannot go there if Silas has people watching." "Then I need to go now, before the watching becomes something else," Victor said. He looked at her. She was standing very straight, her coat still on, her face doing the thing it did when she was frightened, and refusing to let the fright make her decisions. He crossed the kitchen in 2 steps and put both hands on her face, carefully, his thumbs against her cheekbones. And he looked at her from close range for the first time, in what felt like a very long time, though it had been less than 24 hours. "You stay here," he said. "You don't leave this house. You don't call anyone. You don't Victor Elena." His voice was quiet. The good kind of quiet this time. "Stay here. I will bring him back." Closed her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them, they were wet at the edges, but her jaw was set, and she gave him the single smallest nod he had ever seen from her, which was more than enough. He left. He drove fast but not reckless, the specific speed of a man who cannot afford to be stopped by anything ordinary like a traffic violation. He was on the highway south before he called Croft again. "I need eyes on a location," he said, and gave the address. "Right now." "Who's there? How many? Where they're positioned?" "Give me 8 minutes," Croft said. "You have 5. He had the secondary phone in his right hand and the wheel in his left, and the October sky above the highway was the flat gray of old concrete, the kind of sky that didn't have any weather left in it, that had already done everything it planned to do and was just sitting there, now spent. He thought about a boy who was 23 years old. He thought about dark eyes in a photograph, looking at Elena like she was the only solid thing in the room. He thought about 17, running errands for a contractor, not knowing what he was carrying. He thought about what it meant to hold something dangerous for 6 years, because letting go felt worse than holding it. He understood that. He understood it in a way that had nothing to do with criminal logistics and everything to do with the specific human condition of knowing something that will hurt someone you love and carrying it alone because the weight of it on yourself feels more manageable than watching it land on them. Elena had been carrying it for 14 months. His son had been carrying it for 6 years. Victor had been carrying nothing, because the people who loved him had taken it all on themselves to protect him from it, and that knowledge sat in him now like something lit, like something with heat and no direction. Croft called back in 6 minutes. 2 men on the north side of the building, he said. 1 at the rear exit. They're not making any effort to be invisible, which means either they're amateurs or they don't care if they're seen, which in my experience usually means they've already made a decision and they're just waiting to execute it. Greer, Victor said. Is he there? Big man, gray jacket? Yes, he's inside, Croft said. Victor's hand tightened on the wheel. How long ago did he go in, he said. My contact's been watching 20 minutes, Croft said. The man in the gray jacket went in about 15 minutes ago. Before my contact started watching, Victor ran the math. 15 minutes inside. If Greer had come with a specific instruction, a threat, a grab, something worse, 15 minutes was more than enough. If he'd come to talk first, to feel the situation out before escalating, there might still be time. He pushed the car harder. He parked a block and a half away, came around the back, moved along the fence line of the adjacent property in the cold afternoon air, his breath visible, his footsteps deliberate. He had his firearm. He had not used it in 2 years, had not wanted to use it. Told himself after Elena that he was building toward a different kind of operation, one that didn't require, but that was then. And this was a back fence in the southeast side of Chicago, And somewhere in the building 20 meters ahead of him was a man who worked for the person who had tried to kill him 8 years ago, and somewhere in that same building was his son. He found the rear entrance. The man Croft had mentioned was there, young, heavyset, standing with his hands in his jacket pockets and his eyes on his phone. Unprofessional. Victor came up on his left and had him against the wall with an arm across his throat before the young man processed the movement. Inside, Victor said, "Low and close." "How many?" The young man's phone clattered to the ground. His hands came up reflexively. "How many?" Victor said again. "3," the young man managed, Greer and two others. "Where?" "Third floor." "There's a room at the end of the hall." Victor stepped back and hit him hard enough to put him down without doing permanent damage, caught him on the way down and lowered him against the wall, took his radio and his phone. Then he went inside. The building had been a warehouse once. It had been partially converted into something between a residential space and a storage facility, concrete floors, exposed pipes, the smell of old insulation, and recent takeout. Stairwell on the right. Victor took it, staying close to the wall, his footsteps careful on the metal treads. Third floor. A long corridor. Light from one room at the far end, the door partially open, voices carrying in the flat acoustics of an industrial space. Greer's voice first, low measured, the voice of a man who has done this kind of conversation many times. "Nobody's looking to make this difficult," Greer was saying. "Mr. Vane wants to understand what you know. That's all. We have a conversation. You tell me what you've told the woman, and everyone walks." A pause. Then a voice Victor had never heard before, but recognized immediately, in the same way you recognize something you've never seen, but have always known the shape of young, tight with controlled fear. Deliberately controlled, the fear of someone who has decided that showing it would be worse than holding it. "I don't know what woman you're talking about," the voice said. Victor stopped outside the door. He looked through the gap. The room was large and mostly empty. A table, 3 chairs, exposed brick on the far wall. Daniel was in one of the chairs. Victor could see his profile. Dark hair, dark eyes, the specific lean of someone sitting very still, not because they're calm, but because they're making a deliberate decision not to move. He was wearing a gray sweatshirt, and his hands were on the table, visible, which meant he'd been told to keep them visible, which meant this had already progressed further than a conversation. Greer was standing to Daniel's left. 2 men Victor didn't recognize flanked the far wall. "Let me be clearer," Greer said, leaning forward slightly. "We know about Rosario. We know about the documents. We know you were at the Meridian Hotel 8 years ago. What we don't know yet is what you've done with what you saw." Daniel said nothing. "Son," Greer said, and the word landed with specific wrongness in the room, because Greer was using it the way certain men use it, dismissive, diminishing, a word chosen to make someone feel small, and Victor felt something move through him that was not tactically useful, but was completely unignorable. "You're 23 years old. You're not in this life. Whatever Elena Marlowe told you, whatever she convinced you was worth protecting, it's not worth what happens if this goes the wrong direction." "I want a lawyer," Daniel said. Greer laughed. Not a cruel laugh exactly, just the laugh of a man who has heard something categorically beside the point. Victor pushed the door open. Greer turned. The 2 men at the wall turned. Daniel turned. And in the specific half-second of everyone in the room, registering what they were seeing, Victor said, "Get away from him." Greer straightened up slowly. He looked at Victor with the expression of a man recalibrating very quickly, which meant he had not been told to expect Victor here, which meant Silas had not known Victor would find this address this fast. That was the one advantage still remaining, and Victor was already watching it shrink. "Mr. Hale," Greer said. "Step back," Victor said. Greer took 1 step back. Not a full step, half a step, a negotiating step, the step of someone buying time while he assessed. His hand was near his jacket, but not in it. "I don't think you want to do this here," he said. "Mr. Vane is not in this room," Victor said. He moved to Daniel's side of the table. He didn't look at Daniel yet. He couldn't. He needed to keep his eyes on the 3 men between him and the door. "Stand up," he said quietly, to his left, to the person sitting in the chair. Daniel stood up. Victor finally looked at him. He was taller than the photograph had suggested. The dark eyes were the same, exactly the same, and up close, in the flat gray light of the room, his face had a quality that Victor had not been prepared for, He looked like someone. He looked in the specific architecture of his jaw and the set of his eyes like a photograph Victor had seen once of his own father at 20. Daniel looked back at him with the particular expression of someone who has just had something confirmed that they've been afraid to know. "Come on," Victor said. They moved toward the door. Greer said, "I can't let you walk out of here with him, Mr. Hale." Victor stopped. He turned. He looked at Greer directly, the way he'd looked at Silas this morning, across the conference table, not with anger, not with the theater of menace, just with the cold and complete attention of a man who has already decided what happens next and is simply informing you of it. "Make a different choice," Victor said. Greer looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the two men at the wall. Some calculation happened between the three of them, invisible but legible. Victor was one man. They were three. Those were the numbers. But Victor was Victor Hale, and they were men who worked for a man who had just confirmed to Victor's face that he'd arranged the Meridian ambush, and Greer was smart enough to understand that the geometry of this situation had changed in ways that the numbers alone didn't capture. He was smart enough to understand that Silas's position, which had seemed unassailable, this morning was no longer stable, and that men on unstable ground did not get the kind of loyalty required for what Greer would have needed from his two associates in the next 30 seconds. Greer stepped aside. Victor walked out with Daniel behind him. They went down the stairwell in silence, out through the rear, past the young man Victor had put against the wall, still sitting, still dazed, blinking at them as they passed. Victor kept his hand near his jacket until they were around the corner, until they were moving along the fence line back toward his car, and then he let his hand drop and he exhaled once, fully, the breath of a man who has been holding something in his chest at pressure. They reached the car. Victor got in. Daniel got in on the passenger side. The door closed. The city went quiet around them, the specific quiet of an interior after an exterior, the sealed quiet of a car with the windows up. They sat for a moment without speaking. "He told you," Daniel said finally. "Silas, he told you I was here." "No," Victor said. "He didn't know I was coming here. I found you the same way I found Elena, by moving faster than he expected." He looked at the windshield. "He'll know now. One of those men will call it in." Daniel absorbed this. He was sitting with his hands in his lap, very still, not the performed stillness of the interrogation room, but something more genuine. He was looking at the dashboard. His jaw had a tension in it that Victor recognized, because it was the jaws of someone holding an enormous number of things at once and not letting any of them spill. "How much did he tell you?" Victor said. "Silas, in there." "He didn't tell me anything," Daniel said. He asked. "He wanted to know what I'd given Elena. What documentation?" A pause. "He doesn't know about the recording." Victor turned to look at him. "What recording?" Victor said. Daniel reached into the front pocket of his sweatshirt. He took out a phone fold, the kind with a cracked screen and a case held on with a rubber band, and he set it on the center console between them. "The night of the Meridian ambush," Daniel said. "I was 17. I was carrying a package for one of the contractors. I didn't know who they were. I didn't know what I was carrying. It was cash work. I needed cash. But before I handed off the package, I was waiting in the parking structure. And I had my phone out because I was bored, and I was recording a video to send to a friend. Just a nothing video, the kind you make when you're waiting somewhere." He looked at the phone on the console. Silas was there, in the parking structure, 10 minutes before the shooting. He was on a call. He didn't see me. I was behind one of the support columns. He didn't know anyone was there. Victor was completely still. "What did you record?" he said. "Him," Daniel said. On the call, giving the instruction, he said. Daniel stopped. Pressed his lips together, he said, "And I have listened to this recording probably 200 times, because I needed to be sure I was hearing it right," he said. "Make it look convincing, but don't finish him. I need him walking out of there. I just need the board to see blood." The car was absolutely silent. Victor looked at the phone on the console. "You've had this," he said, "for 6 years." "Yes." "Why didn't you? Who was I going to take it to?" Daniel said, and there was something in his voice that was not quite bitterness and not quite defeat, more like the exhausted patience of someone who has asked themselves this question so many times it has worn a groove. "I was 17. I had no idea whose name was attached to what I'd recorded. I didn't even know who Victor Hale was. I just knew I'd heard something I shouldn't have heard, and the man who said it had looked directly at the column I was standing behind right after he said it, and I didn't breathe for 45 seconds. He looked at his hands. I told myself I'd figure out what to do with it when I was older. And then I was older and I still didn't know. And then I found Elena. Victor picked up the phone. He pressed play. The audio was imperfect ambient noise from the parking structure, the echo of concrete, the slight distortion of a phone microphone not pointed directly at the source. The voice was clear enough. Victor had heard that voice every day for 8 years. He knew it better than he knew his own. In some ways, knew its rhythms, its registers, the specific way it dropped at the end of difficult sentences. Make it look convincing, but don't finish him. I need him walking out of there. I just need the board to see blood. Victor stopped the recording. He sat with the phone in his hand. This was it. This was the thing Elena had been trying to build toward: the documents, the financial records, the paper trail. All of it was corroboration. But this was the center. This was a voice, identifiable and unambiguous, giving an explicit instruction 10 minutes before the Meridian ambush. This was enough to destroy Silas Vane completely. His secondary phone rang. He looked at the screen. Unknown number. He answered anyway. I wondered how long, Silas said. The voice was not the same voice it had been this morning. It had dropped something: the warmth, the management, the performance of a man who was still trying to negotiate. What was left was something older and more direct: the voice, under the voice. And Victor found he preferred it in a repellent way, the way you prefer a wound to be clean rather than festering. Where are you? Victor said. That matters less than what I have, Silas said. Elena is a very resourceful woman. I've always respected that. But Rosario's house on Evanston has been under my observation since this morning, Victor. Not Greer, someone else, someone quieter, someone you didn't account for. Victor's blood dropped several degrees. What did you do? Victor said. Nothing yet, Silas said. I want to be clear about that. Elena is safe. Rosario is safe. They are simply currently in a location that I have better access to than you do. A pause. You have the boy. You have whatever he's been holding on to. I'd like those things, and in exchange I would like to discuss a transition of responsibilities within the organization that allows you to step back peacefully and focus on your family. Another pause. You have a daughter coming, I understand. That's a beautiful thing, Victor. A man with a daughter changes. That could be a good change for everyone. Victor said nothing. I don't want anyone hurt, Silas said. I want to be clear about that too. What happened 8 years ago, that was a different time. A different set of pressures. What I'm proposing now is a clean end to something that has gone on longer than it needed to. You walk away from the organization. You take your family. I never bother you again. And if I say no, Victor said. Brief silence, the kind that has a shape. Then this becomes something that none of us want, Silas said. And the people who are currently safe stop being safe. And your son, who I understand, has a rather interesting piece of audio on a rather old phone, becomes a loose end that someone less reasonable than me decides to address. Victor was gripping the phone. He was looking straight ahead through the windshield. Daniel was watching him from the passenger seat with the controlled, terrified attention of someone who can hear one side of a conversation and has pieced together the other side. Call you back, Victor said. An hour, Silas said. Victor. I genuinely mean this. I don't want to see you destroyed. I just need to not be destroyed myself. There's a version of this where everyone gets something they can live with. Call ended. Victor put the phone down. He sat with his hands on the wheel and the car off, and the gray October sky pressing down on the windshield. He breathed, in, out, the specific discipline of a man managing himself through something that has reached a magnitude where self-management is the only tool left. He has Elena, Daniel said. Not a question, he has eyes on her, Victor said. He's positioned it as a threat without executing it yet, which means he still wants a deal, which means he's not certain he can win a direct confrontation. Can he? Daniel said. Victor thought about the question honestly. He thought about the 4.3 million in a parallel ledger. The board members who had accepted Silas's authority after the Meridian ambush. The 8 years of access. The men like Greer who took instructions without asking the kind of questions that might have stopped this years ago. He thought about what he had. In the opposing column, a recording on a cracked phone, Documents in Elena's careful handwriting. A man named Paulson who was frightened and had sent financial records to a secondary email address, and his own name. His name, which still meant something, which still, in the rooms that mattered, carried weight. The question was whether it carried enough. Victor Hale doesn't negotiate when someone has his family, he said. Daniel looked at him. He's expecting me to call back in an hour and make a deal, Victor said. He's expecting me to decide that Elena and the baby are worth more than the organization and agree to walk away. He looked at the cracked phone still in his hand. He's right that they're worth more than the organization. He's wrong about what that means I'll do. He looked at Daniel. How many people know you exist, he said, in relation to me? How many people in the organization? None, Daniel said. I don't. I've been careful. Good. Victor started the car. I need you to keep being careful for the next 6 hours. After that, it won't matter. He pulled out into the street. There's a hotel on Wacker, the kind that doesn't ask questions. You're going to check in under a name that isn't yours, and you're going to stay in the room with the recording, backed up to every cloud service you have access to, and you're going to wait for my call. And if your call doesn't come, Daniel said. Victor drove. The city moved past them, ordinary and indifferent. Come, Victor said, with a certainty he was building rather than feeling, the certainty of a man who has nothing left to lose except the things that now matter so completely that losing them is not a thing his mind will permit itself to model. Daniel looked out the passenger window. She said you were complicated, he said. She was being diplomatic, Victor said. Something moved across Daniel's face. Not quite a smile, the suggestion of one. Victor drove north, back toward the city's center, back toward the board members and the senior men and the structure he had built and inhabited for 20 years. He drove with the recording on the console beside him, and Silas's deadline running in his head and Elena's address in Evanston, sitting behind everything else like a lit fuse. And he understood, with complete and unsparing clarity, that the man he had always been, the man who controlled rooms by making people afraid, was not the man who was going to get through the next 6 hours. The man who was going to get through the next 6 hours was going to have to be someone he hadn't tried to be before. He didn't know yet if that man existed. He was about to find out. This is a cinematic fiction story, created purely for entertainment. All characters, locations, organizations, and events are entirely fictional. Victor dropped Daniel at hotel on Wacker at 2:47 in the afternoon and watched him walk through the lobby doors without looking back, which was the right thing to do, the smart thing, and Victor sat in the car for 30 seconds after the doors closed and felt the specific and disorienting weight of having just left someone in a building who shared his blood, who had dark eyes and his father's jaw and 6 years of dangerous knowledge in a cracked phone, and who he had spoken to for a total of maybe 8 minutes. He pulled out into traffic. He had 3 hours before Silas's deadline. He used the first 40 minutes to drive to a building in the West Loop that he had never brought anyone to, that existed in no document connected to his name, that he paid for through a property management company registered in Delaware under a name that was not his and had never been associated with him in any public record. It was a 2-room office space on the 4th floor of a building that otherwise housed a dental practice and a graphic design firm. He had used it twice in 5 years. He used it for the conversations that could not happen anywhere else. He called Paulson first. Paulson had sent the ledger records. Victor had them on his secondary phone, 47 pages of transaction history going back 8 years, and he spent 20 minutes going through them, with Paulson on speaker, building a chronology, identifying the transfers that most directly corroborated Elena's documents. Paulson's voice had steadied since the morning. Fear had a way of doing that, burning off into something more functional, once a person's accepted that the situation was real. The February transfer, Victor said. 8 years ago. 4 weeks before the Meridian ambush. Yes, Paulson said. 80,000 out. Split across 3 accounts. Those 3 accounts, do they trace back to names? 2 of them dead end at the shell. The third, a sound of pages turning, or the digital equivalent. The third routes through a staffing company. The staffing company has 1 active employee of record. A man named Reeves. Victor wrote the name down. Reeves is dead, Paulson said. Died 6 years ago. Car accident. Of course he did, Victor said. He sat with the chronology for another 10 minutes after Paulson rang off, mapping it against Elena's letters, against what Daniel had told him, against what Silas had said in the conference room that morning. One of those bullets was never supposed to hit you, and when he finished mapping it, the picture was complete and clear and ugly in the specific way of things that have been true for a long time and have simply been waiting for someone to look at them directly. Silas had not been running a coup. He had been running a slow acquisition. 8 years of positioning, of being indispensable, of accumulating financial leverage and organizational loyalty and board access, all of it building toward a transition that would look, from the outside, like a natural evolution of leadership. Victor stepping back, Silas stepping forward, clean, bloodless. The kind of thing that happened in organizations when the man at the top decided he wanted a different life. The Meridian ambush had been the first step. Make Victor vulnerable, make Victor bleed, and then be the man who held everything together while Victor was in surgery. Build reputation as the indispensable one. Start moving money in the aftermath, when the organization was distracted and grateful, and not looking at ledgers. 8 years of patience. Victor had to acknowledge, in the cold part of his mind, that it was impressive. He hated that it was impressive. He acknowledged it anyway. Then he made the call he'd been building toward. Marcus Webb was 63 years old and had been on the Hale organization's senior board for 19 of those years. He was not a man Victor liked. He was not a man Victor trusted easily. But he was a man who had been in the organization before Silas and who had watched with the quiet and territorial wariness of a senior animal. As Silas accumulated influence, Victor had always read Webb's wariness as jealousy. He understood now that it might have been something more accurate than that. "I need an hour of your time," Victor said when Webb answered. "Tonight, before 8. "Is it not on the phone?" Victor said. "My office. 7 o'clock. Tell no one you're coming. Not your assistant, not your driver, no one." A long pause. "Victor, what is this about?" 8 years ago," Victor said. "And the next 8 minutes, when you decide whether to be in my office at 7 or not." Webb said, "I'll be there." He made the same call to 2 more board members, Carver, who handled the Eastern accounts and had a long memory and a longer grudge against operational excess, and a woman named Sue, who had joined the board 3 years ago and had been asking questions about parallel accounting that Silas had been smoothly deflecting ever since. 3 people, the minimum viable number for what he needed. Enough authority in the room to constitute a legitimate board action. Enough. Then he sat with the secondary phone in his hand and thought about Silas's deadline. He did not call Silas back, he called Croft. "Elena," he said. "Rosario's house in Evanston. There's someone on it that isn't Greer. Someone quiet. I need them found, and I need them removed from the equation without." "Without," Croft said. "Without anything permanent," Victor said. "I need them gone from that location. I need Elena and the woman inside able to leave freely." "That's specific," Croft said. "Can you do it? In what window?" "Before 6, Victor said. I need Elena somewhere safe by 6. "I need confirmation." "It'll cost," Croft said. "I know what it'll cost," Victor said. "Do it." He put the phone down. He pressed the heels of both hands against his eyes and held them there for 10 seconds. He was tired in a way that had started somewhere around 4 in the morning and had been compounding ever since. The specific exhaustion of a man who has not slept and has been operating at full cognitive capacity through a series of escalating emergencies, and it was sitting on him now like weather, like the pressure before something breaks. He had 3 hours. He used them. At 5:48, Croft sent 2 words to the secondary phone. "She's clear." Victor was already in the car. He called Elena's cell. She picked up on the first ring. "Are you out?" he said. "We're out," she said. Her voice was steady, but he could hear the underneath of it, the specific texture of someone who has been frightened and is managing the aftermath. There was a man. I know. He's been handled. Listen to me." He was driving. West Loop to the north side, the long way, the way that didn't pass anything he didn't want to pass right now. "I need you to go somewhere and stay there until I call you. Not Rosario's, not anywhere connected to either of you." "Do you have anywhere?" A pause. "My sister," she said. "In Oak Park." "Your sister doesn't know about any of this?" "No." "Go there," Victor said. "Tell her you had a fight with me and you needed space. She'll believe it." A small, exhausted sound that was almost a laugh. "She will," Elena said. "Don't contact me," he said. "I'll contact you." When I call, it'll be from this number. If you get a call from any other number saying it's me. I know, she said. Elena, Victor. He drove for a moment in silence. The recording, he said. Daniel's recording. I need you to know it exists. If something happens tonight and you don't hear from me, stop, she said. Elena, don't finish that sentence, she said, and her voice had cracked at the edge of it, just slightly, the first crack he'd heard in it since this entire thing had begun, and it landed somewhere in his chest and stayed there. Just come back. That's the only thing I need from you right now. Working on it, he said, and ended the call before he said something else, something less operational and more true. He got to the office building at 6:20. He went up alone, no security, no Declan. He set up the conference room himself, pulled the financial records from Paulson on his phone, connected to the display screen, pulled Elena's scanned documents from the secondary email. He put Daniel's recording, which he had transferred to his own secondary phone, before leaving Daniel at the hotel, cued and ready. Then he sat in his chair at the head of the table and waited. Webb arrived first, at 6:58, 2 minutes early, and came in with the careful alertness of a man who has been in this organization long enough to know that a summons like this one has weight. He looked at the documents on the display screen before he sat down. He looked at Victor. How bad, Webb said. Sit down, Victor said. Carver and Sue arrived together at 7 on the dot, which meant they'd talk to each other in the elevator or the lobby, which was fine. He needed them not isolated. He needed them cohesive. When they were all seated, Victor stood up. He did not give a speech. He had considered giving a speech and decided against it, because a speech was the thing you gave when you needed to move people emotionally, and what he needed tonight was not emotion. He needed these 3 people to look at evidence with the same cold assessment he'd used, and make the same conclusion he'd made, and be willing to act on it. He laid it out in sequence. The financial records first, Paulson's ledger, the shell company, the routing numbers, the 4.3 million over 8 years. He watched their faces as the numbers moved across the screen. Sue leaned forward almost immediately, her eyes moving fast, the eyes of someone who has been looking for exactly this and has just found it. Carver's jaw tightened. Webb went very still. Then the documentary evidence, Elena's scans, contractor payments, the February transfer, the staffing company, the dead man named Reeves. Then the recording. He played it without preamble. Just set the phone on the table, pressed play, and let the concrete echo voice of a parking structure 8 years ago fill the conference room. Make it look convincing, but don't finish him. I need him walking out of there. I just need the board to see blood. He let the silence after it sit for a full 15 seconds. That is Silas Vane's voice, Victor said. Recorded in the Meridian Hotel parking structure 10 minutes before the ambush that almost killed me 8 years ago. Individual who recorded it was present at the scene. His identity and location are known to me and are being protected. He is prepared to testify to the chain of custody of this recording. Webb said, "How long have you had this?" "Since this afternoon," Victor said. "The financial records since this morning." The documentary evidence existed in a secure location for 14 months. He did not say Elena's name. Not because he was protecting her from them, but because her role in this was between him and her and was not the board's business. 14 months, Carver said, and his voice had a particular edge. Someone's been sitting on this for 14 months, and you're only seeing it now. Yes, Victor said, because the person who found it was trying to protect me from what would happen if it surfaced without preparation. He looked at Carver directly. I'm not here to discuss the timeline. I'm here to discuss what happens in the next 2 hours. Sue looked up from the financial records on the screen. He's moved money in the last 48 hours, she said. 200,000. We don't have the destination. Correct, Victor said. He's liquidating, she said. She looked at Webb, then Carver. He knows something's changed. Preparing to move. He gave me a deadline, Victor said. An hour. Issued this afternoon. I didn't call back. He'll know by now that I'm not taking his deal. He looked at all 3 of them. Which means his next move is either to run or to escalate. I don't believe he'll run. He spent 8 years building toward a position he believes is secure. Men who've done that don't walk away easily. He paused. He'll make contact tonight. When he does, I want it to happen here, with the 3 of you present, with everything on the record. You want to draw him in, Webb said. I want him to come to me, Victor said. He'll come because he thinks he still has leverage. He thinks he stopped. He thought about Elena at her sister's in Oak Park and Daniel in a hotel room on Wacker with a cracked phone backed up to every cloud service available. He thinks he has pressure points that I value more than the organization, he said. He's right about the value. He's wrong about what I'll trade for them. What are you trading, Carver said. Nothing, Victor said. I'm not trading anything. I'm giving him a room full of board members and a recording and 14 months of documentation, and letting the organization do what organizations do when they find out someone has been stealing from them and tried to have the man at the top killed. The room was quiet. Then Webb said, You understand what this means for stability. Removing Silas from his current position, the relationships he manages, the contacts. I understand, Victor said. The Eastern accounts alone. Webb. Victor looked at him. He put 2 bullets in me and sat in the waiting room for 6 hours. Every relationship he has is a relationship he built on 8 years of being my most trusted man. Every one of those contacts knows my name before they know his. That's the architecture he built in. It doesn't survive this. Webb looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded once. At 8:16, Silas called. Victor answered on speaker. The 3 board members were in the room, visible, and Victor had told them to stay silent, regardless of what they heard. You missed your window, Silas said. His voice had changed again, not the warmth of this morning, not the compressed directness of the afternoon. Something harder, something that had made a decision. I've been busy, Victor said. Victor, I'm going to need an answer. The offer expires at 9. Where are you? Victor said. Pause. Why? Because I want to have this conversation in person, Victor said. I want to look at you when I give you my answer. He leaned forward slightly. I'm in my office. Come here. Come now. We'll settle this between us, the way things should be settled, without all the noise. A long silence. You're alone, Silas said, not a question. Condition. Victor looked at the 3 people seated around his conference table. Come and see, he said. Another silence. Victor could hear breathing on the other end, specific rhythm of a man running calculations. Silas was good at calculations. But he was also a man who had spent 8 years believing he was the smartest person in every room he entered, and that belief Vic knew, because he had struggled with the same belief himself made you vulnerable in a specific way. It made you want to see the board. It made you want to be in the room where the confirmation happened. It made you come when you should stay away. 40 minutes, Silas said, and ended the call. Victor put the phone down. He looked at Sue, then Carver, then Webb. He's coming, Sue said. He's coming, Victor said. He stood up. He went to the window. The city below was doing its evening business, lights coming on in the office towers, traffic thickening on the streets, the ordinary operations of a world that did not know or care what was about to happen in a conference room 12 floors up. He pressed his thumb against the glass. The cold of it came through immediately, the specific cold of October in Chicago, uncompromising and clarifying. Phone buzzed. Daniel. He stepped away from the window and answered. The backup's done, Daniel said. 4 cloud services. And I sent a copy to an email address Elena gave me. A lawyer she trusts. Good, Victor said. Stay where you are. Is she okay, Daniel said. Elena? She's safe, Victor said. She's in Oak Park, a beat. She worries about you, Daniel said. Came out slightly awkward. The awkwardness of someone navigating a relationship they don't have the vocabulary for yet. She didn't say it like that, but that's what she was doing the whole time I knew her. Worrying about you. Victor looked at the window, at the lights below. I know, he said. He ended the call and turned back to the room. Silas arrived at 8:59. He came alone, which Victor had not expected. And the coming alone told him something's either Silas was supremely confident or he understood that the men he'd been using, Greer and the others, were no longer reliable assets in a confrontation with Victor directly. The alone told him Silas was here to negotiate, not to escalate. The alone told him the calculation had shifted. Silas walked into the conference room and stopped. He saw Webb first, then Carver, then Sue. His face went through a sequence of adjustments, very fast, very controlled, like a man reshuffling a hand of cards so quickly you can't track which card went where. Then the adjustment settled into something flat and watchful, and he looked at Victor. Interesting, Silas said. Sit down, Victor said. I don't think so. Victor pulled out the chair directly across from his own. Down, Silas sat. Victor remained standing. He picked up the secondary phone from the table. He pressed play on the recording for the second time that evening, and he watched Silas's face while the voice from the parking structure filled the room. The face did not collapse. He had to give Silas that the face did not collapse. It did something subtler and more controlled, a series of micro-events that individually meant nothing and collectively meant everything. The face of a man watching the specific architecture of 8 years of careful construction crack along every joint simultaneously. When the recording ended, Silas was looking at the table. Where did you get that? He said quietly. From someone who was there, Victor said, who's been carrying it for 6 years, whose identity is currently secured in 4 separate locations in addition to the one you don't know about. Silas looked up. His eyes moved across the 3 board members. He was doing math. He stopped. Started again. Victor, you have to understand the context of that period. The organization was under pressures you weren't aware of. The Caloran situation was, Silas, Webb said, and the word landed with the particular weight of a man who has been in an organization for 19 years and has just had something confirmed that he had suspected for some portion of that time. Don't. Silas looked at Webb. Don't explain, Webb said. There's nothing in that recording that has an explanation. The room was silent. Victor looked at Silas across the table, and for the first time all day felt the anger. Not the cold operational clarity that had been carrying him through, not the stone in the chest, the actual anger, hot and specific, the anger of a man who has sat in hospital beds and held organizations together and believed, genuinely believed, in the loyalty of the person across the table from him. He felt it move through him like something structural, like a weight-bearing wall shifting. He did not raise his voice. The financial records are in front of the board, he said. The documentary evidence is authenticated and in secure storage. The recording has been distributed to locations you cannot access. He set both hands flat on the table and leaned forward. Your leverage died this afternoon when I got Elena clear of whatever you had on her location. Your operational position died an hour ago when I showed 3 senior board members everything you've built in 8 years. He held Silas's eyes. You have nothing left to trade, Silas. You have nothing left to threaten. You have a choice between walking out of here into whatever you can make of whatever time you have, or sitting in that chair until the people I'm about to call come and make that choice for you. Silas looked at him. His face, for the first time since Victor had known him, had nothing performing on it. No warmth, no management, no calculation running visibly behind the eyes. Just the face of a man who has arrived at the end of something and is standing in front of the wall. You're not going to hand me to the authorities, Silas said. No, Victor said. Then what? The board will handle the organizational matter, Victor said. What happens after that is between you and whatever you've done with 8 years of other people's money. He straightened up. But you're done here. You're done tonight. And if you ever come within operational distance of my family again. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Silas had known Victor Hale for 8 years. He knew exactly what the unfinished sentence contained. Silas sat for a moment longer. Then he stood. He straightened his jacket with both hands, the specific gesture of a man maintaining form when everything else is gone. He looked at Victor one last time. I never wanted you dead, he said. I meant that. I know, Victor said. That's the worst part. Silas walked out. Victor listened to his footsteps down the corridor, the elevator, and then nothing. He sat down. For the first time in 18 hours, he sat down and let his body do what it had been trying to do all day, which was register the accumulated cost of everything, the sleeplessness, the cold, the sustained adrenaline, the specific and exhausting work of keeping himself functional through something that wanted to break him open. His hands on the table in front of him were steady. He was proud of that, in a tired and slightly absurd way, the pride of a man who has held himself together long enough. Webb was already on his phone, speaking quietly. Carver and Sue were going through documents on the screen. The machinery of the organization was turning, doing what organizations did when they identified a threat and began to contain it. Victor's secondary phone lit up on the table. Daniel, he answered. It's done, Victor said before Daniel could speak. A silence on the other end. Then, is she safe? Victor said. You're safe, it's done. Another silence. Longer this time. Victor could hear the specific quality of it, the silence of someone who has been holding something at pressure for a very long time and has just been told he can put it down, and the body doesn't know immediately how to do that. Okay, Daniel said finally. His voice was slightly rough. Okay. Stay at the hotel tonight, Victor said. I'll come in the morning. He set the phone down. He looked at the window, at the city lights, at the ordinary, beautiful, indifferent machinery of Chicago, doing its night business below him, and he thought about Elena in Oak Park, and a daughter who was coming, and a son he had spoken to for 8 minutes in a car on the southeast side, and whose face had looked like his Avanos was in an old photograph. He thought about a locked box under a floorboard. He thought about the letters, numbered 1 through 6, laid out on his bedroom floor in the middle of the night. He thought about the words she had used in the 5th letter, save. I am not your enemy. I was trying to save you. He had been saved. At considerable cost to everyone in his immediate vicinity, through no plan of his own, by people who had loved him more carefully than he deserved. Carver looked up from the documents. Victor, we need to talk about the transition. The Eastern accounts, the Ferretti relationship. Tomorrow, Victor said. Can't wait until... It's waited 8 years, Victor said. It can wait until morning. He picked up his coat, picked up both phones. He walked to the door. Webb looked at him as he passed. Where are you going? Webb said. Victor thought about Oak Park. About a woman in a coat she hadn't taken off, sitting in her sister's house, waiting for a call from a specific number. Home, he said, and walked out into the corridor, toward the elevator, toward the city, toward whatever came next, which was not going to be simple, and was not going to be clean, and was going to cost things he hadn't finished counting yet. But it was going to be his. For the first time in 8 years, the life in front of him was going to be entirely and only his. This is a cinematic fiction story, created purely for entertainment. All characters, locations, organizations, and events are entirely fictional. He drove to Oak Park at 9:43 in the evening, with the heater running, and both phones off and the radio not on. Just the sound of the highway and his own breathing in the dark interior of the car. He had not eaten since the previous evening. He had not slept. His eyes felt like they had sand behind them, and his shoulders had a deep structural ache that was not from anything specific, but from 18 hours of carrying everything at once. And he drove through it the way he drove through most uncomfortable things by not stopping. Elena's sister lived in a narrow 2-story house on a tree-lined street where the leaves had mostly come down and were sitting wet on the sidewalks in the glow of the street lamps. He found the address from memory. Elena had mentioned it once, in the context of a family dinner he hadn't attended, and he had filed it the way he filed everything, completely, without trying. He parked in front and sat for a moment. The front light switches were on. He could see movement through the curtain of the downstairs window, 2 shapes, close together, the particular proximity of women, in a kitchen. He watched it for a moment, that ordinary and unreachable domestic warmth, and felt something in his chest that he didn't immediately have a name for. He got out of the car. He knocked. The door opened and it was not Elena. It was a woman who looked like Elena the way a rough sketch looks like a finished drawing, the same architecture, the same eyes, but without whatever specific quality Elena had that made every room she stood in slightly more serious. Sister. Her name was Kate, he remembered. She looked at him with an expression that was 1 part wariness and 2 parts the specific appraisal of a woman who has spent years watching her sister love a difficult man and has opinions about it. She's in the kitchen, Kate said, and stepped back, which was not a welcome exactly, but was the functional equivalent of one. He went in. Elena was sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of something in front of her that she wasn't drinking. She was still in her coat. She looked up when he came in, and the sequence of things that moved across her face happened very fast, and he caught all of them the relief first, immediate and complete, the relief of someone whose body has been maintaining a sustained tension for a very long time and has just been given permission to release it. Then something more complicated. Then finally, the same steadiness, except this time the steadiness looked different. Less like a lid and more like something genuine, like a person who has arrived somewhere and knows it. He sat down across from her. Kate made a sound that was not quite a cough and not quite an announcement and left the kitchen. The door between the kitchen and the hallway did not quite close behind her, which he understood was intentional and did not hold against her. Done, he said. You said that on the phone, Elena said. I'm saying it again, he said. In person. So you can look at me while I say it. She looked at him. The kitchen was warm and smelled like coffee, and the specific warm bread smell of a house where someone has been cooking comfort food, and the fluorescent light above the table was slightly too bright and turned everything slightly too honest, and he was aware that he looked exactly as bad, as he felt unshaven, hollowed the Pacific wrecked quality of a man who has burned through everything and is running on the residue. Silas, she said, the board has it, he said. The recording, the financial records, your documents. All of it. Webb is handling the organizational matter. He put both hands flat on the table. He won't come back from this. There's nowhere for him to come back to. Elena nodded. She looked at her mug and the witness, she said. Daniel, he's at a hotel on Wacker, Victor said. I'm going to him in the morning. She looked up at that. Something moved in her face, the specific tension of a person who has been carrying two separate and enormous things and has just been told that both of them are, for the moment, safe. He watched her exhale. He watched her shoulders drop by a degree he doubted she was aware of. I should have told you, she said. Yes, he said. I tried, she said. I want you to know that part. I wasn't keeping it to protect myself. I was keeping it because every time I got close to the edge of telling you, something happened that reminded me what kind of man Silas was and what he would do if it surfaced wrong. The man who introduced me to Rosario. I know about the car accident, Victor said. She blinked. You found that in the letters. Third letter, he said. I read them all. Twice she was quiet for a moment. Trusted you, she said. I know that. I know I made a decision that wasn't mine to make alone. She pressed her lips together. I had watched you trust him completely for 4 years by the time I found out. I didn't know how to make you see something that your whole relationship with him was built to prevent you from seeing. Victor looked at his hands on the table. You were right, he said. About the method. Not about keeping it from me, but about the rest of it. About what he was doing. About what it would take to expose it. He paused. I would have gone at him directly if you'd told me. I would have confronted him with half the information and no documentation, and he would have. I know, she said, that's why. He looked up at her. That's why, he said. And there it was, the whole architecture of the 14 months, laid out in 3 words. Not distrust. Strategy. Protection of a man who would have protected himself badly. He had been saved. He had said that to himself in the office, looking at the city lights. He was still saying it now in a different way, looking at her face across a kitchen table in Oak Park. Daniel, he said, tell me how that started. She wrapped both hands around her mug. She looked at the table for a moment, assembling something. He found me on social media, she said. I had a profile under my name before you and I met, when I was still doing community work. He sent me a message. It was the most careful message I've ever received. 2 paragraphs. He said he thought I might be his biological mother, and he understood if I didn't want to respond, but he wasn't looking for anything complicated. He just wanted to know where he came from. She stopped. I sat with that message for 3 days before I replied. 3 days of picking it up and putting it down, and telling myself every possible version of what the right thing was. She looked up. I replied, You've been meeting him for 4 years, Victor said. Not consistently, not always. Sometimes months would go by, her voice was careful. I didn't know how to do it, Victor. I don't have a template for it. He didn't either. We were both feeling our way through something that didn't have instructions. She paused. I didn't know about the Meridian connection until 14 months ago. When he told me what he'd seen, what he'd recorded when he described the voice on the call, I didn't know whose voice it was until he played it for me. And when I heard it, her jaw tightened. When I heard it, I understood that the thing the 2 separate parts of my life, had been connected the whole time without either of us knowing. Victor said, he looks like my father. Elena went still. In the photograph, he said, in the box. He's looking at you and I have a photograph of my father at 20. Same jaw, same way of holding the eyes. He looked at the surface of the table. I didn't know what I was seeing when I first looked at it. I understand it now, Victor, she said softly. Does he know, he said? About my father, the family history. He knows your name, she said. He knows who you are in general terms. I was honest with him about that. Once it became clear, it was once the Silas situation made it relevant. He knows you're not a simple man. A pause. He came anyway. Victor was quiet for a moment. He's brave, he said. He is, Elena said, and something in her voice when she said it had a quality, he recognized the specific warmth of someone describing a person they have watched from close range, whose qualities they have cataloged over time, with the particular pride of someone who cannot say mine, but feels it anyway. He understood that feeling now. He had felt it in the car with Daniel, looking at the profile of a young man who had held a dangerous recording for 6 years and come forward anyway, and sat in an interrogation room with Greer and not broken. He had felt it and not known what to do with it, and he still didn't entirely know what to do with it, but he knew it was real, and he knew it was staying. He reached across the table. He put his hand over hers. She turned her hand over and held his, and they sat like that in the Too Bright kitchen in Oak Park while the night settled around the house, and Kate moved quietly somewhere else in the building, and the city outside did its indifferent business. What happens now, Elena said. With the organization, he said, Webb manages the transition. There are things I have to be present for the board restructuring, the accounts, the relationships Silas was managing that need to be formally transferred or terminated. It's weeks of work, not years. I'm not disappearing overnight, he paused. But after that, she said. We talked about Portland, he said. Before all of this. You said once you wanted somewhere with rain that wasn't Chicago rain. She looked at him. You said Portland sounded like somewhere people went when they were running away from something. I was wrong about that, he said. There's a difference between running away and leaving on your own terms. She was quiet for a moment. The baby, she said. She's going to need, I don't want her to grow up, knowing what this was. What you were. She won't, he said, not from me. Victor, I mean it, he said. I'm not asking you to pretend the history didn't happen. I'm asking you to believe that I'm capable of being a different man in a different place. Because I think I am. I think the last 18 hours, he stopped, looked at their joined hands. I think the last 18 hours were the last time I operate like that. The last time I move pieces around a board and leverage people and use fear as a management tool. He looked up at her. I'm tired of it. I was tired of it before last night. I didn't have a reason to stop until you gave me one. She looked at him for a long time. Her eyes were wet at the edges again, the way they had been on the phone when she'd told him not to finish the sentence. I gave you a lot more than one reason, she said. You gave me 3, he said. You, the baby, and a son I didn't know I had. She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, the wet had spilled slightly at the corner of the left one, and she pressed her wrist against it, a small and unself-conscious gesture, and looked at him with an expression that he did not have adequate vocabulary for and did not try to translate. Come to bed, she said. Kate has a guest room. You look like you're going to fall over. I'm fine, he said. You're not fine, she said. You're operating on fumes and stubbornness, and you've been doing it for 18 hours, and you're going to stop now. He almost argued. He felt the reflex of it, the ingrained resistance of a man who had spent 20 years treating rest as a liability. Then he looked at her face, steady and tired and real across the table, and he let it go. Okay, he said. He slept for 9 hours. He did not dream, or if he dreamed, he remembered nothing of it, and when he woke in the gray morning light of Kate's guest room, he lay still for a moment, orienting himself the way you orient after any profound dislocation, checking the basic coordinates, feeling for what was real. The room, the light, the particular quality of silence, in a house where other people are already moving. He was alive. Elena was alive. The thing that had been running in the dark alongside his life for 8 years was in the light now, and the light had done what light does. He got up. He went to the hotel on Wacker at 9 in the morning. He called ahead from the lobby, so Daniel would know it was him at the door. He took the elevator to the 7th floor and knocked twice on room 714 and waited. The door opened. Daniel looked like he had slept about as well as Victor had, which was to say imperfectly, which was to say like a person who had too many things running in his head for sleep to get full purchase. He was in the same gray sweatshirt. He stepped back from the door and Victor went in. The room was a standard hotel room bed, desk, window with a view of the river, the particular anonymous cleanliness of a place designed to be occupied and vacated without leaving traces. Daniel had left traces, a jacket over the desk chair, cracked phone on the nightstand, a takeout container from somewhere. The small human evidence of a person who had been sitting alone in a room all night with a lot to think about. They sat. Daniel in the desk chair, Victor on the edge of the bed, which was not how Victor typically arranged himself in rooms, but the room was small and it was what there was. It held, Victor said, everything you gave me, the recording. The board accepted it. Daniel nodded. He was looking at the floor. He's gone, Victor said. From the organization. From any position where he can reach any of this. He paused. You're not in danger from him anymore. Neither is Elena. Neither is Rosario. Daniel looked up at that. Rosario's okay? She's fine, Victor said. She'll need to relocate, probably. But that can be arranged. He paused. That will be arranged. Daniel looked at him for a moment. You don't have to do that, he said. She didn't. She wasn't doing any of this for you. She was doing it for Elena. I know, Victor said. That's why I'm doing it for her. Something moved across Daniel's face. Not quite surprise. More like a recalibration. The expression of someone updating an assumption. Elena said you were complicated, Daniel said. It was the second time he'd said it. The same thing he'd said in the car on the southeast side, and the repetition had a quality to it less an observation than a process. Working something out through the saying of it. She's been generous, Victor said. Daniel looked at the window. The river was visible through it, gray-green in the morning light, moving with the particular indifferent energy of bodies of water that have been moving through cities longer than the cities have existed. I don't know what I'm supposed to call you, Daniel said. Victor looked at him. The jaw, the eyes, the dark hair slightly disheveled from a bad night's sleep. Nothing specific, Victor said. Not yet. Not until it's something that means what you want it to mean. He paused. We have time. Daniel looked at him. Do we? He said. Not skeptical. Just asking. I'm leaving most of what I've been running, Victor said. The organization will have new management. I'll be present for the transition, and then I'm done. Elena and I are going west. He held Daniel's eyes. I'd like you to come. Not immediately. Not if it's not what you want. But I'd like you to know that the option is there. Daniel was quiet for a moment. He picked up the cracked phone from the nightstand, turned it over in his hands once, set it down. The gesture of a person who has had a habit of holding something for so long that the hands go to it automatically. She spent 4 years not telling you about me, Daniel said. Yes, Victor said. And you're not angry about it. I was, Victor said, last night, sitting on my bedroom floor with the box open. He thought about the right word. I was dislocated. It felt like the shape of everything was wrong. And then I kept reading and I understood why she did it, and the anger didn't go away exactly, but it moved. Into something else. He looked at his hands. She was protecting you. The recording, the witness she was building toward, she was protecting you specifically. She understood before I did that you were the most exposed person in all of this. A 23-year-old kid with a recording of a powerful man giving an order, and no protection, and no name anyone would recognize. He paused. She spent 14 months building a case thorough enough that when it surfaced, you'd be safe before it surfaced. She did that. Daniel was looking at him now with an expression that Victor recognized because he had seen it the previous afternoon and had not known then what it was. He knew now. It was the expression of someone who has spent a long time being uncertain about whether they mattered to the people they came from and has just been given a specific and non-theoretical answer. She's something, Daniel said. Yeah, Victor said. She is. They sat in the hotel room for another hour. They did not fill the hour with anything monumental. Victor asked about Daniel's work. He did IT support, had been doing it since he was 19, had a small client base he'd built independently. Daniel asked, carefully, about the transition Victor had mentioned, what it meant in practical terms. Victor explained, in general terms, what walking away from an organization like his looked like, which was less like a door closing and more like a tide going out gradual, things left behind in the sand, some of them useful and some of them not. Daniel listened the way he seemed to listen to everything without interrupting. With his eyes steady and attentive, the listening of a person who grew up in environments where information was scarce and therefore treated carefully. When Victor stood to leave, Daniel stood too. They faced each other in the small hotel room, with the river in the window behind them. Victor put out his hand. Daniel looked at it for a moment. Then he took it. They shook hands. which was a formal and insufficient gesture for the situation they were in, and both of them knew it, and neither of them tried to make it something else. There would be time for something else. That was the thing Victor was learning in this late and effortful education of his, that there was time. That not every gesture had to carry the full weight of everything it was adjacent to. That some things could begin small and become large over time, like most of the things worth having. "I'll call you," Victor said. "Okay," Daniel said. Victor left the hotel and walked to his car in the gray morning and sat with his hands on the wheel for a moment before starting it. The city was doing its morning business around him. A woman walked past with a stroller. A delivery truck idled across the street. Two men in hard hats stood on a corner, drinking coffee from paper cups and looking at something on one of their phones. And the ordinary persistence of the world, continuing to be itself, was something Victor was able to look at this morning, with an attention he hadn't had available to him yesterday. He looked at it. He let it be what it was. He started the car and drove back to Oak Park. The weeks that followed were not simple. He had not told himself they would be. The board restructuring took most of 3 weeks, during which Victor was present in rooms he increasingly wanted to leave. Navigating the slow and complicated work of transferring operational authority without triggering the kind of uncertainty that made organizations dangerous. Webb was a steadying presence colder than Silas had ever performed. Less warm, but functionally honest in a way that Silas had not been. And honesty, Victor found, was easier to build on than warmth, even when it was less comfortable. Silas had left Chicago within 48 hours of the conference room. He had resources. Victor had understood that the $200,000 transferred 2 days before Elena walked out was the beginning of a larger liquidation that Silas had been preparing for longer than the deadline he'd given Victor. He had been preparing an exit for some time. He had simply not expected to need it this soon. Victor did not pursue him. He had considered it. In the cold and dispassionate way, he considered operational questions and had decided against it, not from mercy exactly, and not from any softness he hadn't previously possessed, but from the understanding that pursuit would extend the chapter, would keep him inside the machinery of the life he was leaving, would cost time and attention that belonged somewhere else now. Let him go. Let him have his exile. Let that be the shape of it. Rosario was relocated to a city Victor did not ask the name of, through arrangements he made through Croft and established under a name that would hold. She called Elena once to say she'd arrived, and Elena told Victor, and Victor nodded and did not need more detail than that. Paulson was given a severance and a reference that did not mention the specific nature of his cooperation with Victor and asked for nothing from him in return. He was a man who'd been in the wrong place with the wrong information, and he had made the right choice when it mattered, and that was enough for Victor to consider the matter settled. The hardest conversation was with Declan. Declan had called Silas on the night Elena left. Victor had known this and had set it aside through everything that followed, filed it in the back of his mind under later. And now later had arrived, and he was sitting across from Declan in a coffee shop on the north side, with 2 cups neither of them were drinking. And Declan was looking at the table like a man waiting for a sentence. "He called me first," Declan said. "I want you to know that. I didn't. I came to you. And then he called me when I was on my way home and asked about Mrs. Hale and I. I told him she'd gone out on foot. I didn't think it was. I didn't know what was happening." "I know you didn't," Victor said. Declan looked up. "You've been driving me for 3 years," Victor said. "He's been in this organization for 8. You weren't looking for the thing you were standing inside of. None of us were." He picked up his coffee cup, set it down without drinking. "I'm not going to hold it against you, but I'm also stepping away from the operation, which means your position changes." "I understand," Declan said. "Webb will need a driver," Victor said. "If you want it." Declan looked at him for a long moment. "You're really done," he said. "You're actually, yeah," Victor said. "I'm actually." Declan nodded slowly. The nod of a man processing something that restructures a significant portion of his sense of how the world is arranged. "Okay," he said. "Yeah, I'll talk to Webb." They shook hands on the sidewalk outside. Victor drove himself home. Elena had gone back to their house, the Chicago mansion with the windows that rain had hammered against 2 weeks ago, the house with the loose floorboard in the bedroom, and the glass of water she hadn't drunk that had long since been emptied and washed. She was there when he arrived, in the kitchen, and she looked better than she had in. Oak Park rested in a way that was more than sleep, rested in the way a person looks when they have set something down that they've been carrying. The baby was due in 3 weeks. She moved carefully, with the specific deliberate attention of a woman at full term. And there was something in the sight of her, in the kitchen in the afternoon light, that hit him the way the familiar could sometimes hit, without warning, like something new. He stood in the doorway. She looked up from whatever she was doing at the counter. "You talked to Declan," she said. "Yeah," he said. "How was it? Easier than it should have been," he said. "I think that's a sign of something." "A sign of what?" she said. Thought about it. "That I'm ready," he said, "to stop making things harder than they need to be." She looked at him for a moment. Then she turned back to the counter. "There's food," she said. "Actual food. I made something." "You cooked," he said. "Don't make it a thing," she said. He came into the kitchen and sat down and ate something she had made, and it was imperfect, slightly oversalted. The kind of meal that someone makes who is competent but not passionate about the process. And it was the best Drasix meal he could remember eating, which he understood had nothing to do with the food. Daniel came to the house twice in the weeks before the baby arrived. The first time was brief, a Sunday afternoon, coffee and very little of the conversation that the situation seemed to call for in theory, and that none of them were ready for in practice. They sat in the living room, the three of them, and talked about things that were not what they were actually talking about, which was, what are we to each other? What do we call this? What does the shape of this look like going forward? They talked about Daniel's work. They talked about Portland. Victor mentioned it. Daniel said he'd been to Portland once. Victor said, "How was it?" Daniel said, "Rainy." And Elena said that was the point. And something about that brief exchange, the three of them in a room talking about rain in Portland, had a quality that Victor couldn't name and didn't try to. The second visit was the week before the due date. Daniel brought takeout from somewhere, and they ate at the kitchen table, and afterward he and Victor sat in the living room while Elena rested. And Victor told him, for the first time, in more detail than he had in the hotel room, about the Hale organization. Not a confession, not an apology, just information. The honest shape of the thing, who he had been, and what the operation was, and why he had believed in it, and what the last month had clarified about the cost of that belief. Daniels listened the way he listened to everything. When Victor finished, Daniel was quiet for a moment. "She knew all of it," he said, "before she married you." "She knew the outlines," Victor said. "People in this city know the outlines." "She knew more than most, because she's not someone who accepts outlines when she can get the specifics." "And she married you anyway," Daniel said. "She married me anyway," Victor said. Daniel looked at the middle distance for a moment, working through something. Then that either says something about her judgment or something about you. "Probably both," Victor said. A small sound from Daniel that was the same suggestion of a smile as in the car on the southeast side, and Victor felt the same thing he'd felt, then a recognition that had no adequate language. Just the specific and inarguable weight of it, settling somewhere permanent. The baby came on a Thursday. She came at 4 a.m. in a hospital on the north side, in a room that smelled like antiseptic and the specific metallic warmth of medical equipment, under fluorescent lights that were exactly as unflattering as the ones in Kate's kitchen in Oak Park, which Victor had apparently decided was the lighting context in which his life made the most sense. He was in the room. He had been in the room for 6 hours by the time it was over, which was longer and more difficult than he had imagined it would be, not because of anything that went wrong, but because of the specific and overwhelming fact of a person coming into the world. He had not known what to do with himself for most of those 6 hours. He had held Elena's hand. He had been useless in the particular way of people who are accustomed to solving problems and have encountered something that is not a problem to be solved. When the baby arrived, she was very red and very loud and absolutely furious about existing, which he found, to his surprise, extremely reassuring. He held her. He stood in the corner of the delivery room and held 6 pounds and 4 ounces of his daughter against his chest, and she was still loud and still furious, and she smelled like nothing he had encountered before in his life. And he looked at her face and thought, "I will not be who I was." Not as a vow, not as a declaration to anyone, just as a fact. A simple, private, unwitnessed fact. Elena was watching him from the bed. She had the specific expression of someone who is exhausted past the point of expression and has arrived on the other side of it, somewhere quieter and more fundamental. She looks angry, Victor said. She's been in there for 9 months, Elena said. Give her a minute. He gave her a minute. The anger didn't resolve exactly, but it modulated, the screaming quieted into something more intermittent. The red face relaxed by degrees, the fists unclenched, and she moved her head slightly against his chest, with the blind, searching instinct of a thing that has just arrived somewhere and is already trying to understand where it is. He understood that. He put his cheek against the top of her head. They named her May, not after anyone, not from any family lineage or significant history. Just a name that felt like itself, simple and clean, the kind of name that didn't arrive with instructions. 3 weeks after May was born, Victor Hale stood in his study for the last time. The house was mostly packed not in boxes, nothing that obvious, more in the specific arrangement of a space that has been lived in and is preparing not to be. He stood at the desk where he had made 20 years of decisions and looked at the room, and the room looked back at him with the ordinary indifference of rooms. He opened the bottom drawer. The locked box was there. He had put it back in the drawer after that night. Not under the floorboard. There was no reason for the floorboard anymore. No reason for hiding. Picked it up. The latch was still broken from the bolt cutters. He opened it. The photograph. The letters numbered 1 through 6. The hospital bracelet. He sat with the bracelet in his hand for a moment. The small plastic thing, slightly yellowed, printed in hospital font. Hal the date. The 3 words in Elena's mother's handwriting on the back. He didn't know. He put the bracelet back. He closed the box. He carried it out of the study, through the house, and put it in the back of the car where they were packing the last of what they were taking. They were not taking much. That had been his choice and Elena's, separately, and then together, to not carry the furniture and the architecture of the old life into the new one. They were taking clothes, books, the things that were personal rather than symbolic, and May in her car seat, and the box from under the floorboard, which was no longer a secret and was therefore something else. A record, a beginning of an accounting. Daniel was on the sidewalk when they came out. He had driven up from wherever he'd been staying. He had not yet committed to Portland, had said he was thinking about it, had said he had things to settle here first, and Victor had accepted that without pushing, because pushing was not the register he was practicing. He stood on the sidewalk with his hands in his jacket pockets, in the cold November air, and when Elena came out of the house, with May bundled against her chest, he looked at the baby with an expression that Victor watched from a slight distance, not wanting to interrupt it. It was the expression from the photograph. Dark eyes looking at something, the way you look at the only solid thing in the room. Elena looked at Daniel over May's head. Something passed between them, the specific and wordless communication of 2 people who have been figuring each other out across 4 years of difficult terrain and have arrived at something they don't yet have a name for, but recognize as real. Daniel put out 1 finger. May, who was 3 weeks old and furious at most of existence, wrapped her hand around it. Victor watched this from the bottom of the front steps, picked up the last bag from the doorway. He did not look back at the house. He had looked at it enough, had inhabited it for 4 years, had sat in its rooms and believed he understood what his life was, and discovered that the understanding was incomplete. He did not need to look at it again. He put the bag in the car, came and stood beside Elena. She leaned against him slightly, the weight of someone who has been through something enormous, and is allowing themselves, for the first time, to lean. He put his hand on her back. She didn't say anything. He didn't say anything. Daniel unhooked his finger gently from May's grip. He looked at Victor. Portland, he said. Portland, Victor said. I'll think about it, Daniel said. Yeah, Victor said. Take your time. They stood on the sidewalk in the November cold for another minute. Then Elena moved toward the car, and Daniel stepped back, and Victor took one last look at the street, at the trees, with their stripped branches and the wet pavement and the ordinary life of the block, going about its morning, and got in the car. He drove. The box was in the back, no longer locked, no longer hidden, no longer carrying the weight of everything that had needed to be kept from him. It was just a box now. A thing that held evidence of the way a woman had loved a complicated man carefully, strategically, at considerable personal cost, with a patience that he had not deserved and intended, haltingly and imperfectly and over many years, to grow into. The highway opened ahead of them. May made a small sound from the back seat. Helena had her eyes closed, but she was not asleep. He could tell by her breathing. The specific rhythm of someone who is awake and resting simultaneously, someone who is present. He drove west, toward rain that was not Chicago rain, toward a city he did not know, toward a life that did not have its shape yet. That was fine. He had the people. The shape could come.